What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch, making some money investing in fractional real estate online, as usual. I've spent a lot of time on Lofty today and the Lofty Discord. If you've been on there lately, you've still seen quite a bit of discussion about fraudulent deeds, um, you know, those sorts of things. I know I'm really trying to not cover this issue to death, but I feel like there's enough confusion around a couple of different things that I just want to put some framing in place, like sort of, share a little bit of knowledge I have about how some of these things work and the difference between a couple of different things. And so I want to remind everybody, I'm not a practicing lawyer. I only ever practiced in New Jersey. I passed the bar in New Jersey and New York, but I only ever actually got my license in New Jersey. I practiced for a short time, did all real estate related stuff, a lot of title work and contracts and whatnot. Never litigated any fraudulent deed issues. And I haven't ever really been in a law. I'm trying to think about if this is true, but I've never been in a law, a party to a lawsuit where this was the case either. So, I'm certainly not an expert. I'm not trying to give anybody legal advice about these things. But I do think, I'm hoping to maybe clear up some confusion that seems to be pretty widespread. And I do, and I think a number of you know that I'm a former attorney and so have been asking me certain things. And so instead of just answering the questions in DMs and different places over and over, I just want to share some general stuff. Keep in mind, the law is different in all 50 states have their own sets of laws regarding these issues. And so I'm going to show you a bunch of different sources that are from all different states, right? So depending on where the property that you're concerned with, the answer might be different. You have to look up, what's happening in your, particular state with your, and sometimes it's even going to be a little bit different how you're going to enforce things from one county to the next. But so in general, and so all these are either just like random articles about this stuff, or statutes from some of the states, or just articles from attorneys. And so take that for what it is, right? You can find this on the internet. This has been it's becoming bigger and bigger. I actually had one of my agents almost fell for listing a property for somebody who was not the actual record owner of the property. And so it's something that's, I think, happening more and more. Um, and it's, that's something that we actually need to look out for. I feel like, I don't know, I had a really rough day. I look crazy all day. I know I look crazy all the time, but I felt like I looked extra crazy today. Maybe because I had that zoomed in picture earlier. Anyway, oh, the other thing I want to make sure, is this mic working any better now that I've moved it? I also changed the setting today, so if it's worked better today than other days, let me know that as well. Okay, so back to this. A couple of things. Yeah, it is becoming more and more prevalent, right? And so I actually noticed in some of the research I was doing that there's some counties in Florida that have some pilot programs to sort of try to prevent this in different ways. But anyway, so what's the issue as far as, okay, if you own a property that has been transferred to someone else by a deed that you think is a fraudulent deed, in some way it was done incorrectly, and and you're a victim of this, okay? So there's a couple of issues that keep coming up, and so one that I think this distinction isn't being made. There's typically, and this is just from here, right? There's both criminal and civil remedies, and I think this is probably going to be true in every jurisdiction, but I'm not 100% certain of that. And so what you do as far as to help with the criminal enforcement versus the civil enforcement, or the civil remedies, are going to be very different. And so I want to focus first on the civil remedies, and then I'll jump back and get into the criminal ones. But so first of all, what's the general reason for a civil suit is to, either collect damages, or get some sort of an injunctive relief, or some specific action. And, so in this instance, the type of suit that you're going to bring in most places, although I don't think this is going to be this case everywhere, is what's called a quiet title action. Um, this is one that when I was a law clerk, I actually worked on some of these a little bit, but certainly, again, I'm not an expert, not giving you legal advice on this. That's why I'm pulling up, different articles to actually, give you some a little bit of sense of it. But so in general, this is a suit where you think you own a property, somebody else, has laid some claim to it. This can happen in a number of different ways. Sometimes you have different heirs disputing, who's owned something. You use this sometimes when there's a boundary line dispute. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that you might do this. Fraud being one of them, right? You might do it to remove a lien holder that maybe like actually I have been involved in this situation where there was a bank that had a lien on a property. That bank had been sold. The following bank had gone out of business. It wasn't clear who owned a lien or if anyone did. We did a quiet title action to actually get rid of that lien. So there's all different reasons why you might have this. But somebody fraudulently, forging a deed or coercing a deed, either way is one of them, right? And so, typically, obviously, the first step, you hire an attorney, you tell them what your case is. Um, and there's quite a few things that come into play in doing this, right? And we'll get into some of just a couple of those that I think are specific to the DAOs and the type ownership, not really specific to a DAO specifically, but ownership in an LLC. But so that is a suit that is where you just argue the case, right? And at the end, the judge or the court determines like, okay, who really owns it. They might what they might do in a case where there was a forged deed is they might invalidate that deed. They might have that party deed it back, although I think that's the less likely solution. But I mean, it's however it's resolved after the case, the true owner of the property is determined, and that's why they're basically saying they're quieting all other claims, right? Um, there's I've seen some discussion on like what is this actually going to cost. Investopedia tells you 1,500 to 5,000 or more, depending on the state and the complexity. Um, One of the reasons I was really hoping, and I still hope that a lot of the DAOs avoid having to have lawsuits, is because um, these are, just because of the type of ownership where it's not well known, it can murky, make the water a little bit murky and turn it into a complex case, even if it's pretty simple. And so, the expense of actually doing this, uh, might be more than I think people are expecting. But again, I mean, that's something that you'd want to, if you thought that you were you're going to file a suit, a quiet title action, or something similar, depending on your state, these would be the things that I'd want to ask the attorney about. Now, one of the things that I think there's been a lot of confusion about is who can actually file this, right? Normally, um, if it were me as a person, if I'm going to, and again, can vary by jurisdiction, but most of the time, civil suits, you're not, bringing them on someone else's behalf. And so normally it would be the entity itself. If the entity is who lost the title, right, who it was fraudulently transferred from, you'd expect that entity to bring the suit. Um, but that's not always the case with LLCs and with other legal entities. And so this is one of the things I think maybe a lot of people don't know about, is this thing called a derivative suit. And again, this is just from, it's just talking about rights and responsibilities of LLC members. This is just another law firm's website. Um, I'm sure they're talking about a specific state. I didn't even look into where this is. I just want to talk about some of these ideas in general. But again, I mean, you're going to want to hire, if this is something you're going to do, you're going to need to hire an attorney to do it. Um, but I think some people don't even might not even realize this is a potential possibility. And so there's something called a derivative action. This is when a member of an LLC brings an action on behalf of the LLC, and they do it to protect from wrongs committed by management or others, right? And so in some of these situations, it seems like there's the potential that this might be the right answer, or in a case where um, it's a third party they want to bring it again, and they've asked the management to bring the suit, and the management has declined to do so. And so, this is one of those sort of peculiar instances where, you're bringing a suit on behalf of the entity, even though you don't represent the entity. You're just a member of it. So, whether or not this is something anybody would want to bring as a derivative action, um, I don't know. I mean, it, I think for me, if I owned a really large chunk of multiples of these DAOs, I would think about it. But if not, and and again, it's something that you can only do, or well, let's see, does this talk about it? Oftentimes, you have to have asked the LLC to do it, the management to do it, and they've refused to do it. I don't know if that's going to be the case everywhere. Again, a lot of this stuff varies by jurisdiction. Um, but it is something that's an option for that I, when I've talked to some people that are super frustrated and they're like, yeah, I just want the DAO to do it. And I mean, I think the simplest answer is, well, you propose a vote for the DAO to do it, right? That's how we decide if the DAO is going to do something. But if they are not going to do it, once you've requested it and it's been denied, there is this other possibility of a derivative suit. Now, is that going to be the case um, for the DAO entities? Well, that's something I'm not really sure about. And again, would be a good question for the attorney, if you decide to hire one. But I was looking into the DAO legal structure a little bit, and they are Wyoming LLCs that are the DAO is just a legal wrapper, and I don't know if every single um, entity is well, I don't think they're all exactly the same on Lofty. I think some of the older ones might be a little bit different entity. I'm not sure, but I believe they tend to be Wyoming LLCs. Again, you want to look up, your own individual one to be sure. But as far as I could tell, it's they become a DAO by adding specific language um, from the regulations into I think it's the operating agreement or into the articles of incorporation or organization. And so I couldn't find anything that led me to believe that the change to the election or the change to being a DAO versus just a regular LLC would take away your ability for a derivative suit. Again, I'm not sure. I'm not giving you advice on that. That's something that if obviously is a question that would have to be answered to be able to move that forward. Um, but at least from what I looked up so far, I couldn't figure out a reason why you couldn't. And so, in case it's not clear, what I'm saying is, if you ask the DAO to bring a suit of a quiet title action through an attorney and they didn't do it, they said no, we're not going to do that. It's possible just as an individual member to bring a derivative suit. Now, again, it has to be you'd want to talk to your attorney and make sure that that's something that they believe that it's the proper situation for it. There's not it's not it's not like you can just left and right go suing people on behalf of groups just because you own a piece of the LLC. You want to figure out like, hey, is this something? Do we really have the right to do it here? If so, you know, do I even think, is there a chance that this is going to succeed, right? Like these are some of the questions that you'd want to ask. And again, it would be, uh, I think the answer is probably different in Ohio and Illinois and Florida. It might not be very different, but the laws in each state, I think, are going to vary, and the attorney in this specific jurisdiction is gonna be the one that's gonna let you know, like, hey, does this work? And then, I think the whether or not it can be brought as a derivative suit probably depends on the Wyoming LLC statute, I think. And again, I'm saying I think because I really don't know, right? I mean, these are issues. These are some of the issues that you need to work out. But I think that some people maybe are assuming that they can't do anything as an owner if they've proposed that a DAO do something and the DAO refuses to. Now, as far as I know, there hasn't been an actual proposal to bring one of these suits yet. I know there's people waiting to see what Lofty's going to do. Um, there's people waiting just to just see if everything's going to work itself out, and I think there's, um, I I'm not dealing with any of the parties involved, right? And I only own a couple of properties that are even involved in the whole mess, and I don't own any that are in this, that are in this title situation. I specifically look up the ownership of every DAO before I buy into it, and was lucky enough that I caught a couple that I almost bought into on these ones. But if you had bought it prior to it changing, I mean that could have been an issue. One of the things too, I think, I don't know if I saw it on here or elsewhere. Um, One of the requirements for bringing a derivative suit often, and again, can change by jurisdiction, is that you owned your shares when the alleged wrongdoing took place, right? Whenever the act took place. So, like, I don't think that you could just go in, buy tokens in these now, and bring a derivative suit if you didn't own at least some before. Again, may vary from one state to the next, but that's how I understand that is typically uh, settled. So let's see, what else do I want to say about this? Oh, so so I think that's one of that's the main thing. One, I think a lot of people didn't realize like what it's called a quiet title action, what exactly that quiet title action is doing, what it's not doing, right? If you're bringing a civil suit like this, nobody goes to jail because of a civil suit, right? Like you can bring this suit, you can win, you can maybe get some damages, meaning you're getting paid something. You might you might get your title back, depending on what the outcome is. One thing that might not happen is most likely you're not going to get your attorney's fees paid, unless you get some punitive damages that maybe you get to pay, you pay it out of that. But again, it's you're gonna have to look up the specific, and really you want to talk to an attorney in the specific state that where it's happening, and actually, they'll rely on specific statutes to that state, maybe even some things in the county itself, at the county or city level. Um, but so that's all I want to say about that. And then there's on the flip side, the criminal stuff. And oh, before I forget, please like and subscribe. In the description to this video, I have a link to a Discord that I've set up to talk about fractional real estate investing in general. There's about 80 of us in there, on a regular basis now, talking about a whole bunch of different platforms. Luckily, most of the discussion isn't about this whole mess. We have a lot of other things to talk about. But so please feel free to jump in there and talk about anything you see me talk about on this channel or anything fractional real estate investing in general. I also have links to all the places I'm currently invested on in fractional real estate in the description to this video. That you can find those other links. Do your own due diligence on all of those sites and any properties that you might invest in on those. Just because I do or don't buy something doesn't mean that you should. Yeah, I know I give you guys way too many disclaimers, but I just want to make sure like it's always clear. I don't think you should ever do anything based on something I tell you on here, right? I'm trying to just share some knowledge, share some insight. But if, the only thing I think that the result should be is that it gives you one more idea to go look for something for yourself, one more way to do due diligence, one more thought about the property itself, one more thing to think about, this legal situation here, right? It's not to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Um, but so okay, in this, to seek criminal penalties, right? This is the other option, right? And I think this is the one that maybe a lot of people they're kind of mixing the two, right? They just think it's the same. It's a fraudulent deed, it's fraud, and that's the way that we fix it is a quiet title action. Well, it can be how you get the property back, but it might not be the only thing, um, the only outcome of the situation. And so, so for example, this is a Florida statute. A person who files or directs a filer to file with the intention to defraud or harass another any instrument containing a material, false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation that purports to affect an owner's interest in the property described in the instrument commits a felony of the third degree, punishable as provided in these other sections, right? And so that means it's being a felony. This is now we're talking about the criminal side of this, right? Not the civil side. And so it's possible to bring a civil suit against someone that defrauded you to win and get your property back, but at the same time there's no actual punishment that happens to the criminal. um, and a lot of people think, well, I have to be the entity itself or an owner or something like that to pursue a civil suit. So I have to be in that same situation to pursue a criminal suit. Well, if you read, let's see, this one here in Texas, right? They say, okay, if you're seeking criminal penalties, you just contact your local sheriff's office or police department in the county the land in question is located, right? They do the investigation. They recommend charges to the county district attorney. That's how it happens here. It might be different somewhere else. Um, what this doesn't say is that you go and hire an attorney to try to pursue criminal charges. That's not how criminal charges tend to work. And so one of the things, although there's a big discussion about like who can go ahead and do something on the civil side, the question of who can do something on the criminal side is much different, right? And so this is actually an unrelated state, right? It's the only place where I could find an attorney's site that very specifically spoke to this question, as far as who can report a crime, right? Because at least in California, what they're saying here is it's you not only can the alleged victim report a crime, anyone who has reason to believe a crime has been reported, can file a police report, right? And I think that this is probably going to be the case in most jurisdictions. Although what's kind of funny, and I think it's probably the way I was searching, and this goes on to talk about violent acts, but I don't think it's just limited to that. It may be in some places. But so, if this is where we're going with the criminal side, it's not about going and hiring an attorney to pursue that. And it also might not mean that you have to be, representing the DAO or even an owner in the DAO, at least as far as this reads, right? Like, you just have to be aware of it to report it. Now, um, in some instances, the law enforcement are only going to pursue something like that if a victim wants to press charges, or if there's some reason that they want to pursue it, right? So like, yes, if they get an anonymous tip about this, yeah, who knows that they're going to ever do anything about it. But if you are a aggrieved party in some way, they're not necessarily going to ask you to prove that you're the person who's representing the LLC. I mean, I don't think that they would at all. Um, and I think that this has kind of been lost on some people, right? Now, that being said, does it make sense? Should somebody go ahead and do that? Because I know some people have talked about it, but I've been surprised at how many people have asked me about hiring an attorney to report him for a crime or something, and it like, and I guess maybe that's just a distinction that was made in my head in law school and never went away. That like crimes and civil suits are just completely different parts of the law, and it is it's not we don't even if you are pressing charges, that's not an instance where you're hiring an attorney to push that, right? um on the flip side, the question is, well, do you even want to do that, right? And so why might you not? One of the things that I think uh some people are unaware of, and may not be the case in every state that we're talking about, is that oftentimes, if there's both a criminal suit and a civil suit regarding the same facts, the same situation and the same facts, oftentimes the court in the civil suit will say, okay, we are not going to hear we're not going to hear this case until the criminal suit is done. Once the criminal suit is done, then you can bring the civil suit. And whether or not that's going to be binding in every jurisdiction that we're dealing with, I have no idea. It's a question that you definitely want to ask before you go and pursue one or the other, right? And so one of the things that the people that keep talking about reporting it criminally may not be really thinking through is that it could potentially make it take a lot longer to get a result on the civil side of actually getting the title back and whatnot. It might not. Again, it'll depend on a number of factors, but it's something that you want to ask that question if you decide, or at least I would want to, right? I'd want to ask that question before I would pursue a suit or before I'd, try to press charges on, or even, try to ask the, sheriff or police to investigate a specific problem, right? Um, it's a strange situation, right? Because you don't want you don't want somebody out there that is routinely, committing crimes and defrauding people. At the same time, it's possible that by, pursuing that, it is detrimental to your rights to pursue, the civil side, not from your actual rights, but from a timing perspective, right? As far as getting a result. Um, Hopefully I haven't just confused all this issue more. Again, don't take any of this as advice on what you should do. I just wanted to, throw some terminology out there, put some sort of framing on the issue, make sure that there's a couple of distinctions being made versus, like, understanding what the different types of actions are, right? Like, the big one that I see getting with it seems to be getting confused quite a bit is the difference between the criminal and the civil side of this. But then also, I do think there's been a lot of confusion on, like, who even has a right to pursue this. One of the things is a lot of people keep saying, well, we're going to wait and see what Lofty does. Um, it's not completely clear to me that Lofty is the right party in some of the cases, right? Like, if I am if I'm the LLC, right now, I'm not a person anymore. I'm an LLC. I'm the one whose title was stolen. Um, Lofty doesn't own me as an LLC. I feel like it's my job to go and pursue that, not necessarily, even though it is the platform, and maybe they're in the best position because this is a situation where it's happened to several different DAOs. Um, I don't know, but at the same time, uh, it's hard to see, because they don't, Lofty themselves were not the owners of any of these properties, right? And as they continually claim, we're a marketplace. So it's tough to. Um, I'm super curious how this all ends up, right? I mean, I think that when this is all said and done, it is going to be from so many different, from both a business and legal perspective. I think that this will end up in textbooks, about all sorts of different things, right? Like things to look out for when you're investing in real estate. But I think it'll create, or if it does end up as a legal case, either criminal or civil. Um, there's just so many different interesting aspects of this, and this is what, like I said, I mean, this is not having a huge impact on me whatsoever. I mean, I avoided these particular properties from the beginning and only ended up having a couple that were taken over. Um, I think maybe, and then I bought a couple, very few tokens and a couple that just seemed like maybe these would just be a great deal once a lot of the stuff came out. Um, but not enough. I mean, not enough that's going to affect me one way or another whatsoever, right? So I don't really have a dog in this fight as far as the outcome. I don't own any of the ones that have deeds that have potentially been moved, in a fraudulent manner. Like, none of that. It is one, I've just had a lot of discussions with people who are stuck in those situations. And but the main thing is, and this is what my whole channel is for, I want to see fractional real estate as an industry grow. I do think that the long-term benefit to me of that happening will be immense because I plan to move a lot of my real world investments onto platforms like Lofty and Mogul and Sol's Lot. Maybe not so much ground floor anymore, but I'm sure there will be more and more that show up. Um, but if this turns out to be such a large issue, uh, that if this turns into an issue that can't be overcome, or that just scares away too many investors, I think it has the potential to really stunt the growth of this industry at a minimum, and really just be a big setback otherwise, right? And so it's one of the reasons that I'm still paying a lot of attention. I read every single, every single Discord channel that's affected on a regular basis, just to kind of stay up to date. And then I do just end up getting just a ton of questions about this from different people. Um, so I wanted to just share, some just very general thoughts. And again, that's all this is, right? This is not a roadmap for you to figure out how to pursue things. This is not instructions or a recommendation in any sense of, it is really just I wanted to make sure people understood that there are these two avenues, right? They're not the same, and that depending on which way you're going, whether or not you actually, um, maybe you have the right to do something that you didn't realize, or maybe you don't, and the just trying to give you some of the language to help you when you're looking into this to maybe ask some of the right questions. But obviously, it's something that depending on which thing you're thinking of, you're going to want to ask the either if you're talking to a sheriff or police department, or even trying to contract a district attorney directly, which I think you'll, depending on where you are, will probably not have a ton of luck with that. Um, you want to have the right questions and understand what they may or may not be able to do for you versus if you're talking to your attorney and what they can and can't do, right? So and that's the one that's like, what I've heard regularly, like about hiring an attorney to, to press charges, and like that's, that it just breaks my brain to hear a phrase like that, right? It's not what, it's just not how it works, at least not anywhere where I'm aware of. So anyway, that's really all I want to talk about. Um, I think I probably won't answer any specific questions about this stuff, but if you do have them, maybe I'll be able to point you in the right direction to somebody. It is something I'm not, I just wanted to talk about it because I think that there's a bunch of confusion around some of these issues, but not necessarily, I think for most of us that are on Lofty every day, there's nothing that we need to do about this, other than if we're an owner in one of the affected DAOs, then I think that we need to be, what I would be doing if I were one of them. If I found out one of the DAOs I owned no longer had title to a property, I'd really want to figure out immediately what are we doing about it, right? It's not something that I'd be wanting to wait for somebody else to do something about it. The other thing too, and this is sort of an aside, but if I were in that situation where I knew we weren't the record title owner to a property and we had a tenant in that property, I'd be pretty nervous about collecting rent from that tenant. This isn't something that I've looked up at all. Um, I have no real sense, but I know, generally the thing you can tell probably by now that I'm an investor who is very prudent and conservative, and I will avoid risk more than anything else. Like that's, I'd rather give up some return and avoid risk versus, that's part of why I like real estate. In general, I think it's a relatively low risk asset class. Fractional real estate is adding another layer of potential risk. Um, it's also in certain ways allowing us to mitigate some other risks. So, if it was only adding, I'd be worried, but it also gives me some diversification layer. But one of the things that I started to wonder about and think about is if I were in a DAO that didn't own title to, that wasn't the record title owner, even if I believed we were the rightful property owner, but as far as the world is concerned, on record, we're not the property owner. How would I feel about continuing to collect rent from the tenant, and would I want to disperse those funds, right? I'd be very worried about, like I know this is actually a fraud that happens quite often. If you have a vacant house, like this is something us as agents have to look out for. If you have a vacant house, landlords will put up or fake landlords will put up something on Craigslist and say, hey, rent this place. Um, and then they'll show your vacant house to a potential tenant, and then they'll collect rent from that tenant. Usually they'll just take the deposit, they'll put them in that property, but they know they're not the actual owner of the property. And I know that's a crime, right? Like that's a crime. They're, they're defrauding that tenant. But there's something else that I can't remember what it is, but it's some crime against the property owner as well, right? Like it is You're basically, I mean, because you put a tenant in my property, but you're also collecting rent that's rightfully mine if there is a tenant in there, right? And so if we're in a situation where we don't, as far as the public records are concerned, don't own a property, are we taking on liability by collecting rent? And if we are, was it, would I want to just collect it and then just hold it in escrow and wait until this was all settled? I mean, I'm just not sure what the answer to that is. That's something if I were in the shoes of somebody in that situation, and I'm not actually sure of how many of the DAOs. I know there are several that don't have title currently. I don't know how many of those that don't have title are also have a tenant in them. I'm just unaware. And like I said, I mean, because I don't own a whole bunch of these. But I think that there's some that are in that situation. And if they are, that would make me very nervous as the property manager for that, right? Like if I'm collecting rent for somebody who I know isn't the technical owner of that property right now. And if I'm dispersing it to, owners of that property when I think it's in question, like, was I really supposed to collect this because I'm not a title holder? I don't know. I mean, that would be something, it's something I really don't know about, but it would make me nervous and I'd want to figure out an answer to that immediately if I were in that position, right? And I think um, I don't know, that's a concern that didn't even strike me right away until I started thinking about, the problems of like, so for example, right, when you go to, um, when you go to evict someone, one of the things that you have to show is that you're the owner of the property, right? Like it's one of the things that in general is, gives you the right to collect rent, right? Is that that's your property. And so then when it's not, and if we are collecting, like, what are we doing there? Are we doing something wrong? Now, obviously, if we believe we should have title, then I'm not saying we're something morally wrong, but is it something technically wrong that can get us in trouble? And I don't know the answer to that, right? And so that's something I'd want to find out about. Um, I think if I talk long enough, you'd find out that I'm worried about a million other things that the level of risk, it's really hard to put on, it's tough to judge the risk of something. This is one of the things from that my favorite book, the most important thing. He talks about like it's really impossible to judge risks on the front end, right? Like before things happen. But even after the fact, even once everything's said and done, it's still really tough to know what the risk was that we avoided, right? Like how likely was that thing that didn't happen, was that to happen, right? And so, I spend a lot of time trying to avoid certain risks that I don't really know. I don't know, am I wasting time? Is it something, would I be making more money if I wasn't doing that? But it is something that I think the more one of the things that's kind of interesting, is I've always felt like being too risk averse would make it so I'd make less money as an investor, but somehow through the process of mitigating risk in real estate, it's also helped me to do better, to do better deals, on average. And I think that part of it is that it helps me to not get stuck in deals that look like they were going to be good deals but turned out not to be, and so that helped my average go up significantly. Anyway, that's really all. Now I've really talked a long time. I appreciate you guys that watch these whole things. Commenting, liking, subscribing. I really do just want to grow this industry. I think that the more that we have people that are educated about the issues that we're running into, that are um, really trying to push platforms to do a better job with what they're doing, push co-owners to do better. I think it's just going to make it easier for all of us to make a bunch of money, and that's the goal, right? I mean, that's, yes, I talk about I want to build a community, but the end goal is for us to make money, right? Like I think I will make more money if we have a community that makes the industry better for us as investors. So anyway, that's it for me for today. Until next time, I'm going to keep worrying about random stuff, but also I will keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.